How are you?
My name is George Gannon.
Oh, right, okay, hi. I'm Emma Blake. I was on call last night. I'm the staff nurse at A&E. I just, the others are coming. I just wanted to talk to you quickly. I think, basically I need some help here. I'm really concerned about the potential problems that we have with who gives the authority to move patients. We were incredibly busy last night. I was looking after a patient, Mrs Bateson. The junior doctor and myself thought it very strongly that she should not be moved. She was unstable to be moved. Because we were so busy, I called in the management unit, and the manager, who does come down to help occasionally, she took it upon herself.
Can I just reassure you that today we're not interested in kind of what should have happened and who's to blame and so forth. This exercise is really purely a tool for us to understand and learn collectively.
But the manager is not qualified to move a patient. She asked the consultant over and above us. The consultant had only just come on. So he gave the nod, can we move this patient? He probably, I don't know whether he thought that I'd said that she was...
Good morning.
Good morning.
Liz Deacon.
Liz Deacon. Nice to meet you. I'm George Gannon.
George Gannon.
Good morning, George. Gerald Mason.
I've been invited along today to try to explore the issues surrounding the incident. And I just want, out of interest, I need to know whether any of you have been involved in an AAR exercise, after action review.
I haven't.
You haven't. Okay. Can I just spend the first couple of minutes just explaining that process, because it's quite important for us to understand that this isn't an inquiry, this is not about a blame. What we're trying to do here today is purely understand what actually did we set out to do for our patient. What actually happened in the event, whoever was present or on duty that time, to understand the sort of sequence of events, and then to see whether what we tried to do differed from what actually happened, and then maybe come to a way of learning about that, so that we understand that all organisations, and I'm sure A&E as no exception, get very busy and very stressful places to work. So it's not about the people, it's about how was our processes able to cope with that situation, and what could we do differently. So just from a point of view of, I understand there's an elderly lady who got admitted. What we were trying to do, what would be the perfect kind of scenario? How should it have panned out?
Well, at the time she came in with cardiac problems and diabetes. It was then discovered that she'd actually had an abdominal pain, which had been going on for a long time.
Okay.
So the doctor re-examined her. She was put onto analgesic whilst we were awaiting the test results. The test results came back, her bloods were low.
Okay.
Whilst this was happening, it became of concern that she needed to be on a constant oxygen supply.
So rather than work out on what actually happened, can we just concentrate on what would have been the ideal scenario? Let's pretend it wasn't emergency, it wasn't busy that day, and it would have flowed through. What would it look like if it had flown through without any problems?
Well, from the point of...
Sorry, with all due respect, saying what ifs, ands or buts about an accident and emergency department is slightly tricky.
All I'm trying to do,
sure, accident, emergency, we have to think on our feet and deal with things.
Exactly. All I'm trying to get to is what were we trying to achieve? In an ideal scenario, this is what would have happened.
When the patient
so that I can understand the difference. That's all I'm trying to explore, is to understand the difference about what actually happened and what we're trying to achieve. So, can you...
When the patients are stable, they're moved up to wards.
Okay, immediately. Directly. And if somebody presents with these initial observations, would that be considered priority or low priority? How would you...
She would be sort of in the middle somewhere.
In something, okay.
But she was being a constantly...
So she wasn't at immediate risk, but she needed to be moved in a good timely fashion.
Once she was stable.
Okay, so can you now say...
And also the priority really for this particular patient was her oxygen supply.
Okay, so can you now say what actually happened? Describing, you began to tell me that the results came back, etc.
Yes, perhaps Mr. Mason. Would you like to come in at this point?
What actually happened, I mean, the nurses outlined it for you already, but 86-year-old woman presented at A&E on the advice of her GP. She had chronic heart problems, she was diabetic, she was examined by the junior doctor and then examined again after the nurse discovered that she was complaining of abdominal pains. And as the nurse already told you, he prescribed analgesics, and when I arrived on the ward, she was being treated not only by those two but also by the nurse manager, and I was asked if it was appropriate to move her upstairs, and I was given to believe that she was in a stable condition, and so she was moved upstairs because we needed the bed.
Okay. What went wrong? What was different? Is that the account? Or
What happened was I was authorised to be able to move Mrs Bateson to the ward, as I had been called down as A&E was extremely busy and we were reaching reach point. I moved Mrs Bateson upstairs. I escorted her upstairs to the ward. I was given to believe that a bed would be ready. Unfortunately, when we arrived, the bed wasn't quite ready.
Okay.
So Mrs Bateson stayed upstairs.
And
until
what area did she stay in?
She was in the television room.
Okay. Comfortable?
Of course, comfortable.
Assisted by...
There were nurses on the
sorry,
ward.
There just seems to be a little
Yes.
bit of a...
My main concern was with Mrs Bateson.
Unfortunately, because the paperwork
Sorry,
was
can I-
not ready.
Sorry, can I just let
Yes.
nurse just continue? Sorry, to try to, in your own words, I just remind everybody now that this is not an inquiry. This is not somebody under trial. This is about understanding just the sequence of events, so that perhaps we can learn from that event. So sorry, if you can clarify.
Just generally, the main priority for this patient was that she had a constant oxygen supply.
Okay, that was the clinical
Unbroken.
need. Unbroken, and this delay caused a failure in that chain. Yeah, she then had to come off of oxygen. Is that right? Because there's no facility within the TV room. Okay, so can you?
Well, it seems to me we're not following the procedures well enough to have an effective process in place where patients can be moved through A&E within the appropriate timescale.
So
I was there.
what would you do differently in this scenario that would help the patient? have a
Certainly, if we
better
had
experience?
had the paperwork in place with the patient.
Okay, do you have a comment on what you think
Mine is,
could be different?
my comment is simply that it's an accident in emergency department and it's not a perfect world. Sometimes, circumstances overtake us and we have to think on our feet and act accordingly.
Do you think it's satisfactory what's happened?
It's not, as I said, it's not ideal, but at the time, we're looking at it with the benefit of hindsight, which makes a world of difference. But at the time, it was deemed the appropriate course of action, and
it was taken.
also, if you like, with the benefit of hindsight, we know that the patient didn't suffer because of it. She's perfectly well now on the ward, being looked after appropriately, and we, the A&E was getting busy. We needed that space.
So am I right in thinking that in exploring this scenario, you all believe that there's nothing we can learn from?
No, I didn't say that. Your question was what was my feeling about it, and I said
Okay. So can
I
I move it on to the learning then? Can I move it on to asking you, if you had your time again, what do you think needs to be done differently? How do we treat patients?
I heard this comment the other day in a different context, but I think it's immensely appropriate if there could be less noise in the A&E department. But again, that's impossible. There's an A&E department. There is always going to be noise and disturbance.
What do you feel? What do you feel needs to be done?
Perhaps it's. I felt that I'd said as clearly. I remember saying that this patient was unstable to be moved. I remember saying it.
And
I'm
your
afraid I was given authorisation that Mrs Bateson could be moved and should be moved. New patients were coming into A&E. There were emergency cases. This happens every day, day and night.
Did you speak with the nurse in charge? Was there communication or?
I was given authorisation by Mr Mason.
Okay. And do you think maybe if we had a time again, it would be better to check with the nurse in charge to see if although the authorisation is being gathered, that in actual fact the situation dictates that the patient
I thought I had
trumps the authorisation as such, because the patient's needs may need to come first.
The patient's needs always come first.
Oh, super.
Unfortunately, because, as I said, the paperwork was not in place.
I've
Then we can say that started this ball rolling.
Okay.
If we had taken her up and the bed had been ready, there would not have been any
Sure.
incident.
From the learning experience, if you had to share this experience with another hospital, how would you explain to them how to do it correctly? What would you tell them in hindsight? Because hindsight is a wonderful thing.
I mean, it's wonderful to dream of an ideal situation.
Yes, let's dream.
Let's dream.
Yeah, let's dream.
Let's arrive at 98% performance targets for a start.
Okay. But what would that look like?
It would look like
And what would you need to do to develop that, to make that dream become a reality?
all the
Probably need
procedures
twice
are
as many staff in the
Absolutely.
A&E department to begin with, and more time.
Is that my buzzer?
That is.
Indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.